Good morning. It is another cold day here. It's supposed to get up to the 40s today. It's only been in the 20s this last couple days. So, yeah, there's still snow on the ground, but there are plenty of signs of life. As you can see, we definitely got a little bit of snow. Some of it has melted. It's kind of like got ice in areas, kind of more icy with the snow instead of like there's the snow and this is kind of just more like a puddle of water that froze. But there is definitely signs of life that spring is working hard. These these are my sad daffodils. So I brushed some of that snow off and yeah, they are definitely struggling, but my dad used to always say that it had to snow on the daffodils 3 times before spring had fully arrived. And yeah, that's kind of been true for a lot of my experience. There really isn't a whole lot going on until you come down here. And here's some more. So even with the snow, spring is working hard at coming forth to give us all the beauty coming back to life. I think that's why I like spring the very best of all the seasons, because it reminds me of the new birth that Christ has given us, especially as I've gotten older and I see so much death and sickness and people hurting. And spring reminds me that God is going to make all things new. And what could possibly be better than that? That Christ, upon his return, he's going to return in all his glory. And he's going to put everything right again. There's Mindy up there. She's wondering what I'm doing. And of course, all the birds are like, what is she doing out here? This is our space. And although I don't think you can see, this is a pussy willow tree. And yes, there's pussy willows on it. Now today, we're on Wednesday of Holy Week. And while the scriptures don't necessarily record what our Savior did on the Wednesday before the cross, theologians consider that after 2 days in Jerusalem, Jesus and his disciples used this day to rest in Bethany and prepare for the celebration of the Passover. This is also the day that is traditionally believed that Judas, one of the 12 disciples, agreed to betray Jesus. So I am basing our devotion today from Matthew chapter 26, verses 1 to 16. However, today we are starting with the last 3 verses of chapter 26 first, and then we're going to go back to verses 6 through 13. And Matthew 26, 14, 15, and 16 reads as follows. Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you?" And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver. So from that time, he sought opportunity to betray him. Now, let's keep our perspective here and remember that Jesus did not come to free us from the wicked or corrupt earthly rulers, but to defeat the devil, who has opposed humanity all the way back to Genesis. So this is something that the disciples had yet not fully comprehended. So here we see that Judas, who was a disciple, he had sought to betray him. And this is the irony of being with Jesus and still betraying him. The irony of walking with him, yet our hearts can still be far away from him. The sad truth is that a person can seemingly follow Christ and still love other things more than him. Judas was blinded by his greed. He loved the silver that the chief priests offered more than he loved Christ. Now, we're going to go back to the beginning of Matthew and starting with verse 7. If you look there, we're not going to read it because I'm sure you're all very familiar with this particular passage, because it's the story of a woman who, unlike Judas, saw Jesus as her greatest treasure. To show her devotion, this woman poured the most expensive oil she had to anoint Jesus. In this passage, she remains unnamed. And we don't really know what her circumstances were, but we know that she regarded Jesus as more valuable than anything else she had. The oil she poured is equivalent to nearly a year's worth of wages. In fact, when Judas saw this woman's devotion and what, to him was a waste, clearly we see that money was this man's main motivation. And it was at this point that Judas went to the chief priests to put his plan into action. So, how do we relate to this story? Do we really see the value of Christ in our lives? Is he our greatest treasure? Do we believe that he alone ultimately satisfies us, even when other things compete for our attention and our devotion? We can look like we are walking with God, yet our hearts can be very far away from him. The world, our flesh, and the enemy will always try to offer something more enticing for us to love than Christ. The 30 pieces of silver, or its equivalent today, can easily pull us away from our devotion to God. This choice is our own, but let's not be misled. We can't do this on our own. We need the grace of God and the power of God's Spirit to help us see Christ as our real treasure and to live in a way that pleases him. When we see how valuable and beautiful Jesus is, ultimately, it is God who gives us the strength to fight for our love for him above all else. It's my hope that each one of us will see Jesus as our greatest treasure, for he is more valuable than whatever we can see or experience in this world. May our hearts truly be captivated by him, and may we be fully devoted to him alone. God bless, and I hope that you've enjoyed this series, and we'll continue on to Thursday in the next video.